Welcome to Camtasia. This sample project will provide a quick tour and get you started. If you're looking for more in-depth tutorials that walk you through the entire process of recording, editing, and sharing your videos, check out the video tutorials on our website. And if you want to open a fresh copy of this sample project, you can find it in the Help menu. Right now, you're in the Camtasia Editor. The editor is made up of the timeline, where you can arrange and edit your clips, the canvas, which is your video preview, and the Tools panel, where your media is stored, along with shapes, animations, effects, and more. At the top of the Tools panel, there's a button to launch the Camtasia Recorder, a tool that captures all of the action on your computer screen. When you're done recording, each clip will be placed in your media bin and on your timeline. If there are parts of your recording you don't need to show, you can trim them from the end or cut them from the middle. If you'd like to add other media, titles, or effects, drag them from the Tools panel to the timeline. If you choose an effect, such as an animation or transition, the clips on the timeline will highlight, showing you where it can be applied. While you're working on your project, use the canvas to position your media and preview any edits you make. You can use the Properties panel to fine-tune your media and effects, such as positioning an object to an exact location, rotating an object, or even changing its scale and opacity. When you're satisfied with your video, export it as a file on your computer, share it to popular web destinations, or upload it to Video Review and invite your colleagues to review the video. Now it's time for you to try. To get started, experiment with this sample project. Try deleting or adding clips to the timeline, or maybe add a transition or effect to something that's already there. You can always open a fresh copy of this project from the Help menu. When you're comfortable, start a new project to create your very own video. If you're looking to do more with your project, like adding animations, quizzes, or even importing your own video, check out the tutorials on our webpage. Thanks for watching.
Hello, grade 10. How are you? Today we'll explain activity 4 in chapter 4, which is from stimulus to response. Now, in activity 4, the objectives that we'll cover, you have to know to distinguish the sensory neuron from the motor neuron and interneuron based on shape and location. You have to identify the afferent and efferent pathway of nerve message through a reflex arc. You have to explain the relationship from stimulus to response. You have to conclude the location of a cell body of a sensory neuron and that of a motor neuron forming the reflex arc. And we're gonna draw out the role of the interneuron in a reflex arc, and we'll schematize a reflex arc showing its constituents elements. Now, let's start first. I want you to know that when touching a hot object, the hand is spontaneously withdrawn, and thus a message is conducted from the receptor to the effector. The receptor is present in the skin of our hands. So these receptors are sending messages to the effector organ, which is the muscle, in order to take away our hand. So in this activity, we will explain the pathway of this message and through which anatomical element is it done. Okay? Now, first of all, one of the most important elements in the transmission of the nervous message is the spinal cord. So what is a spinal cord? Let's look at the structure of the spinal cord. First, there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, one on each side of the vertebral column. Each spinal nerve has two roots, a dorsal root, as you can see, and a ventral root. Now, If we look at the transverse section of the spinal cord, so look guys, this is the spinal cord here in the spine of our body, okay? Now, if we look at the transverse section of the spinal cord, this is the transverse section. Yani I'm cutting the transverse, I'm cutting the spinal cord transversely, and I'm looking to the spinal cord in this direction. Okay, I'm looking to the spinal cord in this direction. Okay, so if we look at the transverse section of the spinal cord, we can see that in the spinal cord we have two regions. As you can see, we have the gray matter, as you can see here, and the white matter. Okay, now the white matter, guys, it contains the myelinated axons of the neurons. As you can see here, this is the myelinated axon of the neuron. And myelin, guys, it is a fatty substance. So since it is a fatty substance, okay, it gives the white matter its white color. Okay, and the other one is the gray matter. It contains cell bodies of the neuron. Okay, the other one, which is the gray matter, it contains the cell bodies of the neuron. Now, in this transverse section, we can identify the dorsal ganglion. As you see, this is the dorsal ganglion. This dorsal ganglion contains the cell bodies of the unipolar sensory neurons. Look, guys, this is the unipolar sensory neuron. It transfers the message from the skin, which is the sensory organ, to the spinal cord. So it is a sensory neuron. And as you can see from its structure, it is unipolar. Now, this dorsal ganglion contains the cell body of this unipolar neuron. Okay? And the ventral root, as you can see, the ventral root, it doesn't contain any cell body, okay? So I can distinguish the dorsal root from the ventral root from the presence of this dorsal ganglion, okay? Now, when Francois Magendie, which is a French physiologist, saw this structure of the spinal cord, and when he saw the roots of the spinal nerve, these two roots of the spinal nerve, he posed a problem. He said, what is the role of each root of the spinal nerve? So the posed problem was, what is the role of each root of the spinal nerve? And in order to answer this question, he made many experiments on the sciatic nerve. As you can see, this is the sciatic nerve, innervating the thigh muscle of a dog. So today we're gonna interpret the results of the experiments done. But before, let's be familiar with some important terms, okay? So I want you please to memorize these terms in order to feel familiar when we are going to interpret the results of the experiment. So this, guys, is the dorsal root. As you can see, this is the dorsal root, and I told you it contains the dorsal ganglion, so I can distinguish it very quickly. Now, the second one, this is the ventral root. Okay, so this is the ventral root. These are the central ends. Okay, these are the central ends, guys. This is the central end of the dorsal root. Okay, and this is the central end of the ventral root. And these are the peripheral ends, as you can see. These are the peripheral ends. It's the peripheries of the root. Okay, so these are the peripheral ends. And when I say that the message is going in a centripetal direction, this means that the message is going towards the spinal cord. And when I say that the message is going in a centrifugal direction, this means that the message is going in the opposite direction, away from the spinal cord. Okay? Now, Also, before I start interpreting the results of the experiment, I want you to know that pain feeling indicates that the nerve message reaches the spinal cord. So look guys, when I say pain feeling, يعني when the dog feels pain, this means that the message reaches the spinal cord. And when we have muscle contraction, this indicates that the nervous message reaches the muscle. Okay? So nervous message بتوصل على muscle. This means that we will have muscle contraction. If there is pain feeling, this means that the nerve message reaches the spinal cord. Now, let's start interpreting the experiment. And you can see these experiments, guys, summarized in document B, page 70 in your textbook. First, in experiment 1, Majindi excited the ventral root. Okay? So as you can see here, this is the excitation. So Majindi excited the ventral root. This leads to contraction of the muscle without pain, as you can see. So the results are no pain feeling and contraction of the muscle of the dog. So after the excitation of the ventral root, this leads to contraction of the muscle without pain feeling. This indicates what? This indicates that the nervous message propagated from the site of excitation towards the muscle. Look guys, we have contraction of the muscle. This means that the nervous message reaches the muscle. Okay, so the nervous message is propagating from the site of excitation, okay, to the muscle. Okay, so it propagates from the site of excitation towards the muscle. Okay, as you can see here. So it is propagating from the site of excitation towards the muscle. I will repeat it one more time. So it is propagating from the site of excitation towards the muscle. Now, in the third experiment, after the excitation of the central end of the sectioned ventral root, look guys, the excitation here is to the central end of the sectioned ventral root. So look what happened here. He sectioned the ventral root, أسطل ventral root, and then he excited the central end of the ventral root. So the result was no pain feeling and no contraction of the muscle of the leg. Okay, so when I have no pain feeling, this means that the message can't move in this way, because when it moves in this way, this means that the dog will feel pain, but here no pain feeling. So how is the passage of the muscle? This indicates that the nervous message propagates in centrifugal direction, يعني away from the spinal cord along the ventral root, but it can't reach the muscle here because we have section ventral root, as you can see. So it will go and it will stop here. So guys, when I excite, or when Francois Majindi excited the peripheral end of the ventral root, look, when he excited the peripheral end of the ventral root, we obtained no pain feeling while we obtained contraction of the muscle of the leg. So this proves that the nervous message is passing in a centrifugal direction. This means that the nervous message is passing away from the spinal cord along the ventral root. Okay, so what do we conclude? We conclude that the ventral root has a motor function. يعني the nerve fibers constituting the ventral spinal nerve are motor nerve fibers. They are carrying the message from the spinal cord to the muscle. Okay, now let's move to the dorsal root. Okay, excitation of the dorsal root leads to pain feeling and contraction of the muscle. This indicates that the nervous message propagated towards the spinal cord and then passed to the muscle, as you can see. So it propagated towards the spinal cord and then passed to the muscle. Okay. Now, in experiment 4, excitation of the central end of the section dorsal root leads to pain feeling and muscle contraction. Okay, so look here, we have the section of the dorsal root. Okay, so the excitation leads to pain feeling and muscle contraction, while excitation of the peripheral end of the section dorsal root didn't lead to any reaction, neither pain nor contraction of the muscle. Okay, this indicates that the nervous message propagates in centripetal direction, as you can see, along the dorsal root. So it is propagating towards the spinal cord. Okay, here in the section dorsal root, it can't continue its path. So we want, or the dog won't feel any pain or any muscle contraction. And here it can continue when we have excitation of the central end. It can continue in the centripetal direction until it reaches the muscle. Okay, so what do we conclude? We conclude that the dorsal root has a sensory function. So the nerve fibers constituting the dorsal spinal nerve are sensory nerve fibers. And at the end, sectioning of the spinal root, okay, leads to total loss of sensation and contraction of the muscle. So the dog lost its pain feeling and lost the contraction of the muscle. So this means that the spinal nerve is a mixed nerve. Mixed nerve means it contains both the motor neurons and the sensory neurons. And it's clear here that this is the sensory neuron, the blue one, and this is the motor neuron, the red one, and the spinal nerve contains them both. Okay, so as a summary, spinal cord connects the brain to the rest of the body through spinal nerves. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Each spinal nerve has two roots: dorsal root containing sensory neuron, all cell bodies of these sensory neurons located in the dorsal ganglion, and ventral root containing motor neurons, the cell bodies of these motor neurons located in the gray matter of the spinal cord. Now, the pathway of the nervous message is sensory organ, which is the receptor, to the sensory neuron, which is in the dorsal root, to the spinal cord, and then to the motor neuron, which is in the ventral root, and at the end to the effector, which is the muscle or the gland. Now, in document C, page 71, in this experiment of document C, an amoeba is sectioned into two parts, A and B, as you can see. Part A, which contains a nucleus, regenerated, okay, and the enucleated part B, degenerated, okay. Now, similar experiments were done to know the location of the cell bodies. So from this experiment, we can conclude, guys, that the nucleus, okay, it has the potential to regenerate, okay? So it gives the cell the potential of regeneration. Now, in document D, similar experiments were done to know the location of the cell bodies of nerve fibers of the spinal nerves, okay? In experiment A, we have sectioning of the spinal nerve leads to the degeneration of fibers at the right of the section. Okay, as you can see, so we have degeneration at the right of the section. This indicates that the cell bodies are at the left side of the section. Okay, so this means that here is the location of the cell bodies. Now, in experiment B, sectioning the ventral root leads to degeneration of the fibers at the right side of the section. This indicates that the cell bodies of the ventral root are at the left side of the section. And in experiment C, sectioning at the left of the spinal ganglion leads to degeneration of fibers at the right of the section. This indicates that the cell bodies are at the left side of the section. And in experiment D, sectioning at the right of the spinal ganglion leads to the generation of fibers at right of the section. This indicates that the cell bodies of the ventral side are located in the spinal ganglion. So as you can see, here we have degeneration and here we have degeneration. This means that the cell body is located in the dorsal ganglion, okay? And here in the ventral root, when we section the central and we have degeneration, so the cell bodies are located here. And you know that the cell bodies of the motor neurons are located in the gray matter of the spinal cord. Okay, so here we have cell bodies in the spinal ganglion, and in the gray matter of the spinal cord also we have cell bodies. Okay, now we still have only one idea in this lesson. Yes. So we still have only one idea in this lesson, which is the reflex arc. Okay, before we start explaining the reflex action, first let's differentiate between the voluntary and the involuntary and reflex action. First, the voluntary actions, guys, are the actions that are consciously under our control, like running, thinking, learning, etc. Okay, now during the voluntary actions, the brain processes the sensory information, so we are consciously aware about these actions. The involuntary actions are the actions that we do unconsciously and we have no control over, like breathing, beating of our heart, blinking of our eyes, okay? So the involuntary actions involve the unconscious part of the brain, like the hypothalamus and the medulla oblongata. Now, what about the reflex action? A reflex action, guys, is an involuntary and a rapid response to a stimulus, okay? Which minimizes damage to the body from potentially harmful conditions. Examples, moving your hand, as you can see here, moving your hand instantly from a hot object. Note that all reflex actions are involuntary actions, but not all involuntary actions are reflex actions. So pay attention, guys. The reflex actions are part of the involuntary action. A reflex action doesn't involve the conscious part of the brain. Integration of the sensory message occurs in the spinal cord. So this is the importance of the spinal cord, that the integration of the sensory message occurs in the spinal cord. Okay, so what are the reflex arcs? So what is a reflex arc? This is a transverse section, guys, of the spinal cord. And we will see now the reflex arc, that is the pathway of the reflex action. As you can see here, a stimulus is detected by a receptor in the sensory organ. Now, this receptor initiates a nerve impulse in the sensory neuron. This is the sensory neuron, okay? Now, the sensory neuron passes the message into the interneuron in the spinal cord, as you can see. The spinal cord here, okay, the interneuron integrates the message and passes it into the motor neuron, as you can see in the animation, okay? Now, the motor neuron, which runs from the spinal cord to the muscle, passes the message into the effector organ, which is the muscle in this case, okay? And then the effector muscle carries out the response, which is represented here as a muscle contraction. You can notice that the sensory neuron is unipolar. As you can see here, it is unipolar. It has only one cytoplasmic prolongation. While the motor neuron is multipolar, as you can see here, this is the cell body of the motor neuron, and it has many cytoplasmic prolongation. And we can see also that the cell bodies of the motor neuron and the interneuron are located in the gray matter of the spinal cord. Okay, so this is the passage of the nervous message. You can see it. So it starts from the sensory organ to the sensory neuron, which is unipolar, to the gray matter of the spinal cord, the interneuron, and then to the multipolar motor neuron, and after that to the muscle, which will contract and carries out the response. Okay? That's all for today. Thank you.